All right. Welcome, folks. Again, my name is Caitlin Baggett-Davis. I lead the work of the North Star Civic Foundation. We're hosting today's conversation in partnership with Common Cause Oregon. For those of you who are new to us, North Star is a private foundation focused on economic issues and on democracy. Our mission is to create collaborative spaces where civic leaders can learn side by side to roll up their sleeves and develop visionary solutions to complex public interest problems. And that's what we're doing here today. We're learning together about a complex issue in the context of a big public decision-making process. With that in mind, I'm really excited to see some of the members of Portland's Independent Districting Commission have joined our conversation. Thank you so much for your service to the city and all the hard work that you've been doing to wrap your arms around this effort. In addition to events like this, North Star is also supporting learning and collaboration related to the implementation of charter change in a few other ways. We share a weekly synopsis of all the news and media coverage on the topic, and you can sign up for that with a link that Autumn will put in the chat. We're also conducting research that we share on the Portland Charter Reform Fact Book, and that link Autumn will also put in the chat. And finally, this summer and fall, we're hosting a civic research group that's focused on identifying what we're calling, it's a little wonky, key performance indicators for the electoral changes based on what we see in other cities when they've adopted similar reforms. Our guests today are Kathay Feng. She is the Vice President of Programs for Common Cause National, and Jonathan Mehta Stein, the President of Common Cause California. Autumn will post our guests' bios in the chat. They are both super impressive people, and we're so lucky to have you join us. And I just want to give a special thanks to Common Cause Oregon for paving the way for this conversation to happen. Now, Jonathan, thank you so much for being here today. In addition to joining us, I just want to recognize you got married last weekend, and it is so great to see you. I hope it was a really joyful event.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. It was a lovely event, and in the course of hugging 250 people repeatedly over a weekend, I got really sick somewhere. So I'm going to manage my way through today. I am thrilled to be here to talk about this issue with all of you. Thank you so much for the invitation. And Caitlin, should I jump in with a few introductory thoughts?
Yeah, can you just get us started with a general introduction to the districting process and how it connects to race and place?
Absolutely. So I want to start by talking about the city of Fremont. When I, earlier in my career, I was the head of the voting rights program at an Asian American civil rights organization in San Francisco called Asian Law Caucus. And the city of Fremont, which is a hugely diverse city with a great range of Asian American communities and Latino communities, it had been represented by a collection of older white city council members for almost its entire history. It had a very, very, very few instances of any kind of POC representation on its city council. So the city was forced, because of a California law known as the California Voting Rights Act, to transition from at-large elections to district elections. And we found out about that process, the districting process, about halfway through. And what we heard specifically was that the Afghan community, which is, Fremont is home to the largest Afghan population outside of Afghanistan. It is a huge part of Fremont's cultural fabric. The Afghan community was not engaged at all. Most Afghan leaders didn't know it was happening. So we showed up and we decided to change that. And we started working with Afghan community leaders, engaging them in the process. And we went to city council and we said, you need to slow this process down and you need to make sure that you're accounting for Afghan population centers, Afghan markets, Afghan cultural hubs, at mosques, and so on and so forth. And they said to us, well, the data we have shows that there's only 2,000 Afghans in the city of Fremont, and there's lots of other communities that are larger. And so we can't rewrite this whole process to account for that. We went to the Afghan leadership and we said, hey, the city of Fremont thinks that there are only 2,000 Afghans in the city of Fremont. And they said there might be 2,000 Afghan teenagers at one high school in the city of Fremont. The problems with the census and collecting data about Middle Eastern and Muslim American communities made it impossible to really know the size of the Afghan community. And so what we did was we went and we sat down at kitchen tables and in coffee shops with leaders from the Afghan community, and we printed big 8x11 maps of the city of Fremont, and we had magic markers, and we had people identify where are the cultural hubs, where are the nonprofit organizations, where are the apartment complexes that are home to large populations of the Afghan community, where are the markets, where are the mosques. And then we took all of that and we went to the city. And we brought a ton of Afghan community members with us. And over time, about half the public commenters at these city council meetings were Afghan community members giving testimony through translators about how much the Afghan community meant to Fremont and how much Fremont meant to the Afghan community. And one Afghan mom gave public comment about how she hoped someday her son would grow up to be mayor of Fremont because the city meant so much to the Afghan community. And you had city council members who had never engaged with the Afghan community before coming down off the dais after these meetings to encourage the Afghan community to stay involved. And you had people who were let's say, wary of newcomers to the city's politics, who weren't particularly welcoming of all these folks who showed up in city council chambers for the first time ever to make themselves heard. They were applauding public comment from the Afghan community members by the end of the process. And in the end, there was a city council district drawn that kept a lot of Little Kabul area, which is the cultural and commercial hub of Fremont for the Afghan community, together with a number of apartment buildings that are centers of the Afghan sort of residential population. And now for the first time, there is a district in the city of Fremont that will be responsive to the needs of the Afghan community. And so districting is a way to recognize the importance of communities in ways that layer race, class, geography, place, and so on, and honor communities where they live in the city of Portland, the city of Fremont, or wherever it is that this is done. And so it's really important to get it done right, because if you do it right, you end up with empowerment and engagement that waterfalls into other civic projects. And if you do it wrong, you can further entrench the silencing of critical communities. And with that, I'll stop.
Jonathan, thank you so much. I think that the story that you tell about the Afghan community in Fremont really connects to all the things that I assumed were critical for district and district mapping from the couple of processes that I've been through related to census and legislative districting. I became really curious this year about the concept of, or the role of, public assets in geographic districting. As I said, Portland's going from at-large to districts, and it's not something that we've really had to think much about in our governance, in our assessment of power. And Kathay, I'm wondering if you can sort of bring us into this conversation on public assets.
Sure. Let me see if I can do this really quickly to both talk about a Los Angeles example, but bring you to Portland. So in LA, in the previous redistricting cycles, we've had situations where the city council president was battling with another city council member. And when it came time for redistricting, they used the redistricting process as a way to punish people who disagreed with them by stripping their community assets out of their district. And so imagine, much like Portland, we have a downtown area that has a lot of, large buildings and a lot of businesses that are located there, headquartered there. That downtown area was stripped out of this particular councilwoman's district, as well as around the University of Southern California, both the university as well as around there when the Olympics came in the 1980s. There were stadiums that were built, there were museums, there were parks that were built around an area called Exposition Park, and that was stripped out of that district. So when you think about communities of community assets, you can think about things like that. Major businesses, right? Things that are institutions like your museums, your concert halls, your park spaces, your universities. If you don't mind, what I'm going to do is see if I can quickly pull up Districtor on the screen. Hopefully you guys can see this. This is free software that probably a lot of you are very familiar with, because if you went through, some previous rounds of redistricting, this is free software that you can find by just Googling districtr.org. You can click on Oregon, and then you can get to drawing districts, and I'm going to choose cities. And they've already set it up so that you can see Portland's 4 districts. It's set up so that you can see the way that would align. And I know that in Portland, you all think about, there are some natural geographic regions that people think about that are like Northeast, Southeast, Northwest, Southwest, right? And what I would say is that you tend to, can you see my hand moving around here? Okay, you have a bunch of universities that are based in the Southwest region. You've got the downtown area, right? You've got the airport up here, right? And there might be a natural inclination to say, hey, why don't we just draw districts that follow the regions that we think about, right? Northeast, Southeast, Northwest, Southwest. And I'm just going to do one quick little thing, which is if you were to just draw a district that was just, let's just take all the things that are west of the river, okay? What you would find is you'd put a lot of community assets all in one district, okay? And we know that some of the most, some of the most needy populations are in the eastern part of the city. And you still wouldn't get close to the population that you need for a single district, the ideal number being somewhere around 163,000, right? So you have to think a little bit creatively about how to not only put neighborhoods and communities together that make sense, how you don't unwittingly draw districts that have all of the assets in one, area. So in Los Angeles, for instance, you could draw one, some Western districts that would have the airport and the wealthiest neighborhoods and, downtown in it. You wouldn't want to do all of that, right? You'd want to make sure that different districts have different ways of distributing their assets. This map also allows you to look at other things like neighborhood organizations and school districts. I have to click that off. And you would want to be sure that as people think about the school districts, that they're also trying to hold some things that people naturally organize themselves around, right? The areas that draw to an elementary school or to a middle school or high school or a single school district, probably want to think about like how you make sure that there's some integrity kept there. Those are all just things that you might want to think about as you are moving forward with talking about how the district lines might be drawn. And I'm going to bring this off screen because I think that maybe sets it up for you all to have a really robust beginning conversation about community assets.
Kathy and Jonathan, thank you so much. Thanks for jumping in at the deep end of the pool and taking us straight to the map. I want to recognize that a couple of our independent districting commissioners put the link in the chat so that anybody who's here, can go yourselves to develop maps, and also please share it broadly in your communities. Let's back up a little bit and talk about why we care about these public, semi-public, and sometimes even private assets to begin with. Can you talk about the relationship between these assets and the power that a city council member might derive from the assets? What kind of power are we talking about?
I'll talk a little bit about, why it was so devastating to have both downtown and the USC Exposition Park stripped out of this particular city council women's district. Downtown is an economic driver, right? It has a lot of major law firms, investment in real estate, and it's a fairly large population that lives there, right? And then I think when you think about, the visitor dollars, whether that's tourism or just visitor dollars that are generated from both the university as well as the Exposition Park and museums around there, it was like stripping what was already a hard-hit neighborhood. South LA is made up largely of Latino and African-American population, lower income, working class, right? That once you strip that out, you're really taking those assets that were intended to try to be a kind of tax base and boon to help that district out of a district that was already hard hit. And so when hard decisions come up, like Where do we plan new train lines, right? How do we build transit that sort of represents those populations? How do we invest in parks? It always feels like that district had a disadvantage because you weren't necessarily thinking about the populations that might be working at the university and what the transit lines that needed to be built that would connect them to that university, because they were in two different districts. So it's helpful to think about kind of what how you have equity built into the way districts are drawn, and also what people's natural patterns are for where they go to work, the resources that they draw on and that they need. There are smaller assets that I think are worth thinking about too. And Jonathan, in his example of Fremont, brought a lot of them up. If you've got a community where they're going to church, mosque, temple at a particular place, are these assets a business area or a community center or the school that all your kids go to, right? Are these assets that you want to hold together in a single area? In Oregon, the Warm Springs tribe found itself separated from the city that they sent a lot of the kids to outside of the reservation. There was a district line that got drawn between the reservation and that town. And what then happens is that all of the resources that you think about connecting the people who live a certain place to the resources and the community assets that they use can be disjointed because it's two different government entities that are thinking about it.
Yeah.
That's what some of the impacts can be.
That's super helpful. And as I'm hearing you talking, I'm sort of coming up with categories, right? There's a power related to the individual elected leaders' power of incumbency, their power as a leader. There's power related to governance. How is a community involved in governance related to that district or that asset? And then there's the power for community in being connected to cultural spaces and important places in the community. I'm wondering if we can actually just take these one by one. Jonathan, can you help us think a little bit about the ways that an elected leader might derive political power from being connected to a public asset?
Yeah, I can name several ways. A political leader, an incumbent politician, can derive real tangible benefits from having civic assets in their district. So the first is visibility. If you have some sort of high profile space, event venue, stadium, university, whatever, in your district, you get to show up at all of the events that are in that district or at that event venue. I'm going to highlight a really silly example. The city of Pasadena, for a long, long time, had these ridiculous districts that very clearly gerrymandered certain communities. And the reason why is because every council member wanted their district to touch Colorado Boulevard, which is where the Rose Bowl parade happens. And because they had a district that touched Colorado Boulevard, they could be on one of the floats sitting on the back of a convertible during the Rose Bowl parade, and they could cruise down the street and they could wave at their constituents. As long as you have these high profile event sites in your district, you get to be in the mix, meeting people, glad handing, etc. Right? So that's one. The second is all the different ways that people who want to do business in your district use campaign cash in order to make that business happen. So if you're home to an area with, if your district is home to an area where there's a bunch of development coming in, residential development or business development, you've got developers, you've got builders, you've got people who are seeking permits, entitlements, licenses. And in order to make sure that all that goes through city council or through the relevant city bodies, they're going to be pumping you full of campaign dollars, right? Even if you aren't the sort of politician that is going to make things happen because you're getting campaign cash from a developer, they're going to cover their bases. They're going to pump you full of campaign cash anyway, right? So, and it's one of the reasons why in some cities we've seen, Kathy and I have seen, incumbent politicians want business districts and they want sites of new development, and sites of ongoing development, because they have a whole bunch of people with business before the city or who are looking to make business happen, and they're going to give you campaign dollars in order to make that happen. And the last is that you can, if you are controlling certain civic infrastructure, you then are working with other parts of government. So if you have the airport or the port or some other major civic institution, you're in conversation with the governor. You're in conversation with federal officials for perhaps if it's a let's say it's a national park or it's a federally controlled land in some way, and that puts you in conversation with a higher profile set of partners, colleagues, and collaborators, and that makes you now all of a sudden able to leverage new relationships in your quest for higher office. Okay, so you put all that together, and there's a real incentive to have these important civic institutions in your district.
Kathy, do you want to add anything to that, or can we move to the governance question? Great.
Comprehensive and perfect.
I think the next topic that came up is related to governance, is related to the ability of constituents to hold accountable public leaders who have major public assets in their districts. Something that comes to mind immediately for me, downtown Portland has really been struggling, like a lot of cities around the country over the last few years. And the public input on how we should envision a future vibrant downtown is a major topic of conversation right now in a city that is governed at large. And I'm wondering what happens in a city that is divided into districts when a shared resource like a major business district is a part of public discourse. Does the city council as a whole think through what those solutions look like? Do district members connected to that district have more power related to those decisions?
I'm not sure that I want to use Los Angeles as the example, because unfortunately the way that the districts are drawn is still controlled by incumbents, and so it is not the ideal situation compared to what Portland is moving to. And so I think that you can have sort of the worst case scenario where assets are essentially used in ways where the person who's got that asset in their district, a downtown area, for instance, can use the issuance of permits and variances and work with developers to control not only what happens in that area, but also to control the entire city agenda, right? The other way that it can work, though, is in settings where the distribution of assets happens through presumably a relatively independent means. It can also be the case that because assets are distributed throughout the city in ways where no one district has it all, it can also promote collaboration, right? And one can think about sort of the multiple reforms that Portland has implemented, whether that's the public financing of campaigns, right? And allowing for ranked choice voting, which presumably means that you're not necessarily automatically pitting candidates against each other, that you can build collaboration into the process. One of those ways that can happen is when you have people thinking about, for instance, development of regional transit, right? You've got people who are coming from eastern part of Portland all the way into places where they're going to work, whether that's downtown or the airport or the western part of Portland. And you can think about that transit affecting multiple different districts, but because there is collaboration around how that transit route happens, that there's a possibility that not only are multiple people touching it, but you're thinking about the best route from the perspective of multiple different districts. So it can happen both ways. It's not always sort of a total dogfight, but it can be a challenge when you think about major assets all being in one district.
Can I add a thought, Caitlin?
Yeah.
I've had the opportunity to watch districtings in a handful of cities, and one of the questions that often comes up, and this is usually a conversation between the people doing the line drawing themselves, so the city council members or an independent commission. Some folks will say, okay, Well, we have a community that's been unable to achieve representation over time. And so let's put them in their own district so they'll be guaranteed to achieve representation. And then others will say, well, wait a minute. If we do that with a number of different communities around the city, we're going to end up with all the downtown and all the economic assets in one district. Wouldn't it make sense to share those economic assets and that downtown business area across a number of different districts? And the counterpoint then is, well, but wait a minute. If you have a district with a low-income community that doesn't have a ton of resources with a portion of downtown or a wealthier area, for example, the candidates for that district are probably going to come out of the wealthier area. They're going to listen to the wealthier area. The voters are going to be the wealthy in the wealthier area. The campaign donors are going to be in the wealthier area. And so by adding some wealthier areas or economic assets into this lower income district, now all of a sudden you're diluting the voice of this lower income district. And what do? Which of the two is it? And the answer, as far as I can tell, the only real answer, as far as I can tell, is listen to the community itself and let them decide what they want. Maybe they want a district in which it's just them, and they can be guaranteed that they will have a voice on council, and it doesn't matter if they don't have a portion of downtown or a portion of the business areas. Or alternatively, they may say, no, we want some of that downtown. We want some of those economic assets. And that's the only way that our district will be held on equal footing with others. But ultimately, they should be in the position to decide that.
Jonathan, thank you so much for using the point, counterpoint as an illustration of how genuinely complex this is, and then boiling it down to, at the end of the day, what does the community want? I'm going to pivot us to a speed round so that we can get to audience Q&A at 12:40. Speed round is your top 5 general district mapping recommendations. Jonathan, I might start with you.
This is definitely not a speed round. I don't know how. So I have a whole list written out on this legal pad. So, okay, number 1. I was going to say it's about recruitment for the independent commission, but you already have your commissioners. So I'm going to strike number 1. I'll give you my top 4. Okay, number 2. Engaging the community takes a lot of time and effort. You have to begin education early. It will take several meetings or sessions or trainings just to get people to do level setting before you can start getting people's input on maps. So make sure you recognize how intensive, how labor intensive, how resource intensive, how time intensive that process is. It can be done in high tech ways or low tech ways. I've done the work in the city of Fremont where we just had a printout of the city and we had people drawing on with markers. I've also done this in the city of Sunnyvale where we rented a room at a public library with a screen. We pulled up a version of Districtor mapping software, and we literally did live line drawing using mapping software with different collaborators talking about what they wanted. So it can be high tech, it can be low tech, but just be careful about how much time it takes. Ranking your redistricting criteria really helps. Kathy might want to say more about this because she is the godmother of California's ranked redistricting criteria, but you have redistricting criteria written into your governing laws around your independent redistricting commission. But as far as I'm aware, they're not ranked. And so what do you do when upholding one of those redistricting criteria comes into tension with another one? And that will inevitably happen. And you need some process for deciding which ones trump others. And so ranking them can be really important. Another one, maybe you've already settled this in Portland, but what are your ex parte rules for ex parte communications? Can your commissioners have conversations with other parties about redistricting outside of open meetings? Can they have conversations with city council member staff, political party officials? Can they have those conversations outside of open government meetings? If they can, do they have to report them? What do they have to report about them? Where is there a public log of all of those conversations and so on? I'm keeping this quick, but I have lots of thoughts about that. And Kathy and I have both engaged with this in a really complex way in California. And then for the Independent Redistricting Commission, your data management policies really matter and your posting policies really matter. So in our independent commission, you have them, they were making policies or setting policy at various points in their process. They would say, okay, our outreach policy is going to look like this. Our language access policy is going to look like that. Our balancing of the Federal Voting Rights Act and community of interest testimony is going to look like this. And then you had to, because their posting was really inconsistent and you couldn't find those documents once they were finalized, it meant that you had to watch every single minute of every single meeting if you wanted to stay engaged. And that biased the process towards professionalized advocates like us, frankly, who had the time and the resources to watch every meeting. And it shouldn't be the case that you have to watch every meeting in order to stay engaged and educated. So it's really important that there's clear posting policies, and that also the data management matters. You're good in California, our statewide process, we had over 40,000 public submissions to the California Independent Redistricting Commission, which Kathay helped design. And it's really, really important that members of the public can go and find all of those submissions, search those submissions, see how those submissions compare to the draft maps currently being considered or the final maps that get approved. And it's a real process. It's really challenging to manage that volume of data and information and testimony. And so setting up those procedures and policies in place at the beginning will ensure success throughout the process.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think this is a good time to recognize that the city of Portland has invested significantly in both supporting the Independent Districting Commission with a process that creates a lot of this transparency, and that there's always still more work to do. And Steve, thanks for posting the Districting Commission documents in the chat. Kathay, do you want to talk about ranking districting priorities, or do you have other top fives that you want to add?
I mean, yes, you should be clear about your, sorry, let me just make this go away. Yes, you should be clear about the criteria, and ranking does help to just create clear criteria clarity for everybody. I think particularly as you get sort of later in the process, you don't want to be arguing about the rules of the baseball game, in the middle of the game. But actually, I think the thing that I want to focus on, because I think Jonathan's given exactly the right things to think about, is maybe just three things. One is the transparency. So I will say that once the commission comes up with the draft map or a set of draft maps that they're thinking about, like honing in on, so from the 145, like these are the ones that we're really looking at, that's when I think you really get like a surge of interest, right? We went from sort of the in California, the commission going around and having audiences of like 30, 40, 50 to as soon as they released the draft maps, like people were lining up 2 hours beforehand to get in, and like rooms that were overflowing to 200 people, and they had to stay there all night. So what I'll say is be ready for that heightened interest once the draft maps come out. Be ready to take the input about what those maps look like in whatever shape they come in, but also to make a process that's transparent. So we had the commission take in input about the draft maps, and then they had a mapper who was on the spot saying, okay, so you're saying, that we've split a neighborhood, right? So tell me what street would you move that to, right? And the mapper on a big screen that everybody could see would be listening to the testimony and say, I think this is where you're talking about, this neighborhood, and it kind of crosses the line over here to this particular street, or this, the edge of this park or whatever. And I can't tell you the number of people who walked away coming in feeling frustrated that the draft match was not exactly right, but then walking away saying, I really felt heard because I saw on the screen, they drew the thing that I was talking about, not the way the whole district would be drawn, but they recognized where my neighborhood or where the place was that I said was really important, right? The community center that got drawn out of the place where everybody lives, right? All those types of things are really important to kind of reflect back. So that kind of transparency. The other thing that I think you just need to be extra careful about is, as after those draft maps come out, to be sure that you give extra attention and effort to giving people who are not already at the table or already prepared to participate, that extra workshop beforehand to get them ready, the extra amount of time to go to the hearing, right? So maybe that's the last hearing, right? So that there's the most advanced notice for people to participate. And I just say that because I think about, again, much like in Los Angeles, the places that are west of, right, are the highest voter turnout. They're going to be the ones who are going to show up to a hearing. They're going to pack a room. You don't need a whole lot of extra education. They're going to do it on their own because they've done their homework. It is places like East Los Angeles or South Los Angeles where they need organizers or other people to help them even understand why this is significant. And once those conversations start to happen, as Jonathan sort of described in Fremont with the Afghan community, it's possible that you can really bring people to a higher level of participation, but it takes extra investment of time and effort. And then the third that I would just say is expect that you're going to get a lot of dissatisfaction around the draft maps, and remind people this is all part of the process, right? The draft maps are the draft maps, and the part of the process is that we want to hear you, can't get around, right? So that we can redraw until we get to the final maps. And if you keep the process transparent and inclusive between the draft maps and the final maps that you come up with, people will not get everything they want, but you will find that people come together and appreciate that this was a process that they were heard, and they're going to embrace the final product. So in California, people hated the draft maps. I can't even tell you, like, they were ready to like burn things down. They were so mad about them. But by the time we got to the final maps, there was a unanimous vote of the commissioners. Nobody sued, and people ended up feeling like, okay, not perfect, but I was heard. And you changed it just enough to make me feel like this was a process where I can have trust in government again. That's significant.
Oh, what a great note. We're going to move to audience Q&A. A couple logistical notes as we do that. Autumn, please take us off record. I want this to be a place where we're learning in public, and we're learning with people whose faces we see in front of us on the screen, and not the entire audience of people who we're going to share this video with, so that all of you can feel comfortable. And then I'm also going to